Hey guys, what's up? We're back with some more WarFrame action, and today I'm going to have a look at a Mag Rework that I have been thinking about for the past 2 weeks. This is a rework that basically it fixes some of the fundamental flaws that Mag currently has, in that she has some anti-synergy, she has some irritating to use abilities, and her survivability is kinda lacking, as well as her energy economy is really suffering at the moment with her current basically her current state is really difficult for her to manage her energy without just running out immediately without hesitation. So the way I wanted to fix this, it just involves 6 pretty simple, relatively speaking, changes to Mag that I think would greatly benefit her in the future. So we'll start off with her changes. So the first change will be to pull, and that is pulling enemies in the general direction of a magnetized bubble, i.e. using pull when you're facing a magnetized bubble should pull all enemies towards that bubble. And this would fix this weird anti-synergy that pull and magnetize have, where if you pull at a magnetized bubble, you end up actually pulling everyone out of the magnetized bubble, which is just really weird. So we're going to bring out 8 of these dudes. I'm going to pause the AI just for shits and giggles. Let's get our energy up. So we'll magnetize. So we'll drop a magnetized bubble. Now magnetize at the moment just draws everyone in, and that's fine. But then you pull everyone out, and what the hell is that about? So it's kind of weird. Some of them do end up walking back into the bubble because they're close enough, but like this is really anti-synergistic because the magnetized bubble actually builds up damage for its explosion from any damage over time that is incurred within the bubble. So when you pull enemies out of the bubble, not only do they not take any damage, not only do they not take any subsequent damage from the magnetized bubble, but they also don't contribute to the explosion damage from the magnetized bubble, which means there's some hilariously bad anti-synergy from pull and magnetize. Furthermore, it's really difficult to synergize pull and magnetize like this, where you want to pull these guys right here into the magnetized bubble. You kind of have to like stand in front of the magnetized bubble, and sort of like pull them in like so, and even then it's really unreliable. Some of them actually end up flying out of the magnetized bubble depending on where you're standing, so like it's kind of difficult to use it like that. So the idea would be to be standing right here, magnetize someone, and if there was someone like standing here, you'd be able to use pull, and that guy would fly into the bubble. That's the idea anyway. The next idea actually is also to do with pull, but this one's specifically to deal with her energy economy, as I stated before, and that is that pull, enemies previously affected by pull have a 50% chance to drop energy orbs upon death, or pull itself has a 50% chance to pull energy orbs from enemies. And this is to fix this little passive that pull apparently had, and apparently always had, which is that enemies killed by pull have a 50% chance to drop an energy orb, because this particular passive is not useful. In lower level missions you'll see it a lot, but in lower level missions you'll basically be killing everyone with everything else anyway, so it kind of doesn't matter. Whereas in high level missions you're almost never killing anyone with pull, because pull has like such a low amount of damage compared to magnetize, polarize, and to some extent even crush. Because magnetize and polarize, they have some level of scaling, whereas pull, being that flat level of damage, it's a meaningless amount of flat level damage. So not only are you not really killing anyone with pull in high level missions where energy actually matters, but your drop chance being 50% means that 50% of those that you somehow miraculously kill with pull, they're not dropping energy orbs. So by that regard, it's really like pointless. It's a really pointless passive on pull. So to change the passive to being enemies that are at any given point in time affected by pull, they immediately have a 50% chance to drop energy orbs, which I believe is higher than the actual drop rate of energy orbs, especially since I've wiped out entire rooms of enemies only to find like 2 energy orbs, or like 1 energy orb. There's like 20 enemies and only like 1 energy orb, so like the drop rate is like super low. And to increase it to 50% chance, I think would be really effective for enemies to just be constantly giving Mag energy, because I feel like that's one of the weaknesses that she needs to address in order for her to be a viable option, especially as a starter frame. Like compared to Excalibur and Volt, like her energy economy is really kicking her down at the moment. So to be able to have that kind of energy orb regeneration rate, I feel like is really good. Either that, or the stronger option would be that pull just straight up pulls energy orbs from enemies. So every time you use pull, there's a 50% chance that each target has a 50% chance to just instantly drop an energy orb. That might seem a little strong, very strong actually, or alternatively that could make her a bit of a support frame, in that she can provide energy just by pulling energy orbs from enemies, which means you don't necessarily have to use Trinity, you don't necessarily have to use Harrow. Like that could be an interesting idea, I don't know, but either is fine for me. Like these changes would effectively make her a bit of a viable energy vampire replacement. Obviously not as strong as energy vampire, but still. The next change would be to her polarize. Notice that I'm skipping over magnetize, because magnetize by itself is actually very good and doesn't really need any changes, but polarize, like basically all the changes with magnetize kind of have something to do with other abilities, which is why they're more pull, polarize, crush changes. So the polarize change is this. Polarize at the moment has an augment called shield transference. Shield transference is the one that shield transference is this mod right here, which is a polarize augment. Mag gains 50% over shields from depleted enemy shields. There's one of two things that I want to do. Either shield transfer. Actually, there's two things I kind of want to do, and it just really depends on what DE decides to, what order DE decides to do. Basically, in the end, the idea is that shield transference either becomes baseline or is still an augment, but using polarize gives you shields from hitting armor, and this would greatly increase the survivability of Mag versus Grenier specifically, because against Grenier at the moment, just using polarize outside of the armor stripping is kind of really pointless. So you don't really find yourself surviving as much against Grenier, which I think is not a healthy thing for Mag. So to be able to replenish shields from hitting armor, I think is a really good idea. Either getting shields from armor becomes the shield transference augment, so that shield transference, the effects of shield transference are actually baseline, or it's the other way around, and you could then use shield transference as a mod that gives you over shields, or you could take that mod out and not get any over shields, but you could still at least replenish your shields from hitting armor. And the reason why I wanted to also be able to replenish shields from hitting armor is because that's the exact same thing that you can do when you're hitting shields. Due to the fact that polarize is now a wave instead of an instant attack as shield polarize used to be, this was back in the old days, this would mean that you could effectively replenish your shields while Grenier are attacking you, which would greatly greatly increase your survivability. Oops. The next change is a crush change. Now, this is a very simple crush change. Crush casting time needs to be made faster, possibly reducing the casting duration by about 50%. The casting duration at the moment for crush is 3 whole seconds, and it looks like... Wait, when I get enough energy, it looks like this. So that's really slow, as you may expect. Oops. Reducing the casting duration by sorry, reducing the casting duration by about 50% is basically what happens when you add natural talent, and that's how fast it is. So basically, Crush needs to be that fast baseline. It just has to be a thing, because in a game as fast paced as this, because you can't use Crush whilst moving, like you find you can use basically 1, 2, and 3. You can use polarize, magnetize, and pull whilst moving. You can't use Crush while moving, so you find yourself actually standing there for 3 whole seconds, and usually in those 3 whole seconds, unless you have like extreme room clearing range, which you probably won't, and even on the plains of Eidolon, like it's just basically impossible to find yourself in a situation where you can safely crush without ever getting hit by like a ship. So you find yourself self-rooting for 3 seconds, and that's 3 seconds where you're going to actually die, because Mag's survivability at the current state, especially against Grenadier, not that particularly good, which means that when you're just standing there for 3 seconds, you're probably going to die. It's the same logic as Banshee. If you watch any of Shy's Banshee videos, you might find that she often says, like, don't stand still. Mag's Crush ultimately makes you stand still for 3 seconds, and you can't do anything, and it's not like the damage like is that particularly high, which I'll talk about in a bit. So it's not like you're giving up a bit of mobility for something great like Peacemaker, like Mace's Peacemaker does. You're actually giving up a lot of mobility for not much at the moment. So like that's the first change for Crush. The second change for Crush is to do with the damage, as I was talking about, and that is Crush should either do finishing damage baseline, or Fracturing Crush as an augment should become baseline, so that Crush gets a new augment that allows it to do finishing damage. Ultimately, like, Crush should have the chance to do reduce enemy armor and do finishing damage. And the reason why I'm saying finishing damage is mostly because of the way that Crush is described, which is that it magnetizes the bones of nearby enemies, causing them to collapse upon themselves. And it doesn't really make that much sense logically for me. If I can reach into the bones of an enemy and then collapse them upon themselves, and yet by virtue of having shields or by virtue of having armor, that guy just gets up and walks off as if nothing happened. That doesn't make any sense to me. And visually, we'll see here, we are like basically collapsing enemies into themselves. So here we're going to fly into a bunch of enemies. Like we were crushing them into each other. And I remember back in the old days, and this was like open beta, you would actually hear them go oh, as if we've like crushed their entire internal organs into themselves. So at the moment, like, with 100% power strength, so not, like, no extra power strength, this is, like, absolute baseline. It does 1,500 magnetic damage and an extra 1,500 damage to enemies who are in a magnetized bubble. The idea that it does extra damage to enemies in a magnetized bubble, I think that's fine. Another thing, maybe it should, like, the extra damage should scale off power strength, so it should just be straight up double, like, you double the damage to enemies who are affected by a magnetized bubble, first and foremost, or even go further and say that that damage is increased by the damage multiplier that magnetize has, which would actually further scale off power strength. The other thing is it also, like, change the magnetic damage to finishing damage so that it goes through armor and it goes through shields. That way, Crush as a thing could actually do some damage. As an ultimate ability, it could actually do some damage versus Grenadier, versus Corpus, versus everyone, basically. Like, the only time, like, it essentially, like, think of Crush being basically as effective against Grenadier and Corpus as it is against Infested, because Infested, they don't have armor, they don't have shields. There's like maybe 1 or 2 that do have armor and shields. Actually, no shields. So, like, it would be that kind of effectiveness to just straight up do raw health damage, which is what finishing damage is. Alternatively, Fracturing Crush is the augment mod for Crush, which basically, as far as I can tell, temporarily reduces enemy armor by 50% for 7 seconds, scaling off power strength and duration. And this is a really nice mod because well, at the moment, like, this is a really nice augment because it gives Crush at least this small niche of being a like hard armor stripper, because at high levels versus things like Bombards, level 120 Bombards, they have a lot of armor which you can't really strip off using polarize. So using Fracturing Crush is a way of just bypassing a giant chunk of that armor, obviously, and then being able to just strip off the remaining armor with polarize. I think is a fairly good idea. To have that being baseline would be a great buff to Mag, or like either, like it's either Crush does finishing damage or Crush strips armor baseline. Like pick one and then make the other one a reality through the augment. That's it. And finally, and this is a passive change because everyone and their mother knows that the bullet jump vacuum that Mag currently has is both a spit in the eye to everyone who wants to have universal vacuum, but also will become redundant when universal vacuum inevitably becomes a reality. And that is why I want to change this passive. I'm fine with changing it before universal vacuum shows up, even, because, you know, at some point I still have like a small universal vacuum, sort of. So the change is that instead of a bullet jump vacuum, every time Mag's abilities do damage, she instantly restores a tiny amount of energy. And by small number, like a tiny amount of energy, we're talking like 1 energy maybe, or 2 energy per enemy per tick of damage. So let's look at what abilities do damage, and all of her abilities do damage. So every time you pull someone, you do 1 tick of damage to that enemy, so that's 1 energy restored. Every time you use magnetize, like when you use magnetize and you shoot them with, and you shoot an arrow into them, that first tick of damage, that I believe that should count. And then there's damage over time that is accrued from the magnetized bubble that should feed energy into Mag herself, so she gets 1 energy per tick per enemy that is in the magnetized bubble. Polarize doing a massive wave, that should, like when that wave hits an enemy and that strips armor or like strips shields, that also should provide Mag with shields, with energy as well as shields. So that should also provide Mag with energy, so like one energy per enemy hit. And then also to be really crazy about it, maybe also provide energy for Mag for every enemy that is hit by the subsequent explosion of polarize stripping armor or shields off enemies. So if there's like 20 enemies grouped together, you kind of end up with like 20 energy per enemy or something like that. Like they have to be really clumped together for that to work, or like if you have like 5 enemies, there'd be some weird math going on in there. But basically every time someone gets hit by exploding shields or exploding armor, that should also provide Mag with like 1 energy. And I'm saying 1 energy mostly because the numbers, like due to the AoE wave clear kind of way that Mag is currently built to be, to go any higher would probably be a little bit absurd. Like 2 energy already, you probably end up with like huge numbers of energy replenishment. 3 energy would basically be insane. I've run that scenario in my head before, and I feel like that's just totally unnecessary. 1 energy just to keep Mag players on their toes, I think is perfectly fine. At least like make it something. And Crush, the fun thing about Crush is that because it actually involves 3 ticks of damage, so we're going to use it again on a group of guys. And you'll notice that there are 3 very distinct ticks: first tick, second tick, third tick of damage. So you notice that there's a very distinct 3 ticks of damage, which means that every enemy provides you with 3 energy. So using Crush on a wave of enemies will at least provide you, it'll probably provide you with the least amount of energy per, like on a proportion basis, but at least like you can use it and not have to worry about wasting 100 energy of your own. Now you may be wondering what happens if you find yourself in a room with a very small amount of enemies and they're really spread apart, which means that Polarize will only provide you with like 3 energy. Let's say there's 3 enemies. You walk into a room with only 3 enemies, they're spread apart, so Polarize won't, like the exploding armor thing, exploding shield thing won't really work. So Polarize will only provide you with 3 energy, Crush will only provide you with 9 energy. What do you do then? That's where the energy economy change for pool. That was number 2, which is that enemies previously affected by pool have a 50% chance to drop energy orbs or pool upon death, or pool has a 50% chance to literally pull energy orbs from enemies. That's where that particular change would come in, so that you still have some way of managing your energy economy. And I feel like this is just really important because Mag has a really bad energy economy right now. She has potentially one of the worst energy economies in the game, and I feel like that is really bad for a Warframe that is basically a caster frame. She's basically like a mage, if you think about it. Like Volt is like a speedster, sort of a mage, but not really. Like he's too utility based to be a mage. Excalibur is too much of a warrior to be a mage, so Mag is a mage. Like, just straight up. All her abilities do damage. So, to that extent, she is a mage. And I feel like as a caster frame, as a mage, to have such a terrible energy economy as she has right now is just really unfortunate for someone who could basically be like the ultra, like, kill everything kind of Warframe. So yeah, those are the changes to Mag that I feel like are really important for her. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. If you really like these changes, then hit the like button, share it with everyone, share it with DE, share it with at SJ Sinclair, SJ_Sinclair I think is Steve's Twitter handle, Reb Ford I think is DE Rebecca's Twitter handle. So share it with them so that maybe hopefully they get a they can like see this video and have a and think about these changes, and you know, if they have some ideas, I would love to hear what they have to say about these changes, because I feel like these changes, to me anyway, these changes would make Mag so much better to play, and would definitely put her in a viable position compared to Volt and Excalibur. And of course, if you really like these changes, hit the subscribe button. Actually, whatever you do, just hit the subscribe button so that you can see more Warframe content that I've produced on a semi-regular basis. If you're also a fan of Heroes of the Storm, I actually produce a lot of content, like I just make a lot of Heroes of the Storm clips, so if you're into that, hit the subscribe button. And if you really like this, you might want to consider supporting me on Patreon. I do have a Patreon right now. It is patreon.com/Kategari. I do have those links down below in the description. And yeah, until next time, I will see you guys later. Thanks for watching. Bye.